Hey everyone, it's Erin with Hail Varsity. I'm joined by a recruiting extraordinaire, Greg, also of Hail Varsity, and we are here for another recruiting question of the week. It has certainly been a very newsy week since we recorded our last video. A lot has happened. As we know, Coach Scott Frost will return for 2022. He was given the vote of confidence from Athletic Director Trev Alberts with a restructured contract.
Yes.
But also 4 of his offensive assistants, that is a lot of just to say right there.
A lot of words. Yeah.
Were let go immediately last week, and so there are changes that have happened, people that are stepping up in interim positions right now, but it looks like those roles, especially once the season ends, will be looking to be filled very quickly.
Yep.
So let's get to it. A lot of you have asked, this is a question that Greg has gotten by a number of people,
Yes.
is what that timetable looks like for these coaches and being hired and how that's going to ultimately affect recruiting with that early signing period coming before we know it.
Yeah, I think that a lot of the reason why the moves were made now instead of waiting until after the season is with recruiting in mind because of how compressed that timetable is now.
Mm-hmm.
So even though it kind of looks strange on the surface when you say, okay, you fired 4 assistant coaches during the season, you still have a couple of weeks plus left in the season, you have those 2 weeks are really important to start to hire those new staff members and bring them in because before we know it, November 28th will be here. Why is November 28th important? That's the first day that coaches can go in-home for in-home visits to potentially sign the 2022 recruiting class, right? And so you're going to, in theory, you would love to, if you're Scott Frost, have at least one of these new coaches in place by then. But even that's going to be tough to realistically hit because he has also said that it's difficult to talk to coaches when they still potentially have jobs right now. And so you have to do a little bit of waiting on that whole process.
Yeah, and it sounds like the first position he's going to be looking to hire is offensive coordinator, and then the rest will fall into place after that because that decision will ultimately lead to what the rest of that offensive staff looks like. I know one question that a lot of people have had is, could there be a full-time special teams coach? But in order to have a full-time special teams coach, you're looking at the coaching staff as it currently exists looking differently. Who takes potentially quarterbacks? I know I've seen some people mention, could Sean Beckton just take all receivers instead of just tight ends? So there are a number of options on the table, but it will really start and end with that offensive coordinator because that will ultimately help shift the thinking as far as who does that person want? Who's that person interested in?
Yeah, because it's not just, then there's so many ripple effects from that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the new offensive coordinator, who does that person want to hire for those other assistant positions? But then who does that person identify as positions of need for the 22 class and for the all-important transfer portal and JUCO market, right? Scott Frost has talked about numerous times about getting some of those immediate impact difference makers from the transfer portal and from JUCO. And so a new offensive coordinator may have new ideas about how that goes. So I think that there's so many questions to be answered based off of hiring that offensive coordinator. And I think he's right in saying that needs to be the first person put in place. But again, the timing of that is just so difficult because it's compressed because only 2 weeks after that November 28th date is when the early signing period opens up, right? And so you just don't have a lot of time to really identify as a lot of moving parts are happening and people are starting to sign places.
Yeah, it seems like the traditional signing date is going to be particularly important for Nebraska for this 2022 class, if I just have to say so myself. It's not that they won't get a number of people for the early signing period. You will still likely see a few players sign on that date, but I think this traditional date is going to end up being probably a little bit more important than in the last few years, just because at that point you should know what your staff looks like. You should have an idea of how everything is going to shape up for the year ahead. I wouldn't be surprised even if some of the players who are committed wait until the second signing date to really understand kind of what they're up against.
Yeah.
So, from a timetable perspective, this is all going to happen both very quickly and kind of slowly. It's going to be very much a hurry up and wait kind of thing where there's a lot that's happening right now, but you have to now kind of wait and see how things go because, I'm guessing that offensive coordinator is not going to have a position group it's in charge of because one thing that Frost said is, he's going to really rely on this person and hand over play calling duties. And if he does that, that person really cannot be also then focusing on the wide receivers. So that's why it goes into what could Sean Beckton help out there.
Right.
But at the same time, does that mean that Frost then takes quarterbacks, or does Frost end up helping in an area? We know Bill Callahan helped with quarterbacks.
Right.
So I mean, I just said a word I just said a name.
Boy, I almost said, yeah. But even if Sean
Beckton,
but then there's another layer too, because if Sean Beckton has tight ends, and let's just say, for the sake of saying, that he then takes wide receivers as well, can he then be the new recruiting coordinator? He could be someone that's also in line to do that after Ryan Hill's departure. So that there are a lot of things to still be figured out, and titles that need to be distributed, that are all very important in their own right, with, again, not a lot of time, but still some time to figure it out.
Yeah, it kind of seems like Sean Beckton might be the person in line at this point for that recruiting, that like the head of recruiting, because I mean, Ryan Held really did lead the charge in so many ways, but we do know that Sean Beckton was really kind of behind the scenes, one of the most efficient recruiters, so a lot to be answered. Long story short, the timelines are going to be interesting to watch, and if you want more on what that looks like, definitely stick with Greg at hailvarsity.com. You can bookmark the recruiting notebook Sundays through Thursdays, 6 p.m. Central. He dives into a lot of these topics in further detail, and also sometimes is able to talk with recruits about kind of what's just going on. So you definitely want to check out hailvarsity.com for more on this topic. He'll have more tonight. Again, in that recruiting notebook, 6 p.m. Central. So just go ahead to hailvarsity.com, bookmark it. You can go ahead and subscribe right now if you don't mind. We'd love to have you.
Absolutely.
We'd love to have you. But you should also subscribe to this YouTube channel, because you will get all of the notifications from all of the videos of players, coaches, not just football, basketball, volleyball, you name it. We've got it all for you. So we appreciate you as always. If you have a question for our next recruiting question of the week, go ahead and leave that right now in the comments below. You can also tweet at Greg Smith HV or at Hail Varsity. I always say you can tweet at me at Erin Sorensen, but I'm sending it to Greg anyway. So again, Greg, any final thoughts before we let you go for the week?
It's a busy time, but it's going to be good as we kind of get through here. It's a unique time.
Recruiting experience.
Yeah.
We're just there. That's the positive spin on it.
Yeah.
It's the unique.
I appreciate you.
Well, we will talk to you next week. We appreciate you as always. Have a good. We'll be back for practice stuff. But anyway, we'll talk. We'll see you soon. Whenever you watch the next video.